Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this video where I'm going to be going over the new changes that has come with the new version of ReactJS. So a couple months ago, ReactJS released version 6.4. It's actually at version 6.6 now. However, 6.4 brought a lot of new changes, and I've made a video in the past going over the changes for version 6 of ReactJS. But now there's also a lot of new additions, which I didn't find actually a lot of resources online when trying to make this video. So I thought it would be a good idea to explain it to you guys. What are some of the cool things that are now possible using the library? If you want to check out the code will be all in the description. If you also want to check out my version 6 video, which I go over everything in the new version of ReactJS, I'll leave the link for that in the description. But for now, let's get into the tutorial.
As many of you might know, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning. They have courses on a multitude of topics such as React, TypeScript, NodeJS, and much more. A course that I took and I really liked was the Modern CSS Writing Better, Cleaner, More Scalable Code course by Harry Roberts. CSS is definitely one of my weak points in web development, and this course helped me find a better approach to learning the technology. One of the best aspects of Skillshare is that it is curated specifically for learning, meaning that there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes so that you can stay focused and learn as many skills as you desire in 2022. The first 1,000 of my subscribers that click the link in the description will get a month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today.
Okay guys, so in order to show you guys the project, I'm going to be using this online React compiler over here. It has a very simple piece of React code. As you can see over here, it's just a project already generated. And what we need is to install ReactJS into our projects with version 6.4 and above. So in our case over here, we have version 6.6.1 because it is the latest one. However, depending on when you're watching this video, it might change. It doesn't matter as long as it is above 6.4. So the main changes that come with this update is related to data fetching in React. So I really like talking about this topic because it is often misunderstood, especially by beginners, and there's a lot of good alternatives out there that people simply don't know. So ReactJS implemented an easy way for you to reduce the amount of code you're writing, similar to different syntaxes such as the ones you find in a Next.js project or when you're using an external data fetching library. So I'll explain it better when we get to that point. However, it is important to understand that a lot of the new features with ReactJS version 6.4 requires you to make a little bit of a change in how you define your routes in React. So let's start defining some routes in this project, just as an example. So I already have over here 3 different pages that we're going to use as routes in our project. I have one called contact, one called data, and one called home. They're just examples. As of right now, all they display is just a simple header tag displaying the name of the page. However, they're going to be the routes for our project. So over here at the top, what I want to do is I want to import some stuff from ReactJS. And what I want to tell you guys is that the way you define your routes will change because now we use something called the create browser router. I believe this create browser router function already existed before 6.4. However, I think it is required to use it if you want to use the features that I'm going to show in this video. Now, what is the difference? Well, the only difference is that before, when you define the routes in React, you would usually import something like browser router, import some routes, and then just display them as a component tree over here in your return statement. But now you define it as an object. And it's not that different from what it used to be. It's just a little bit of a syntax that is different. So what you have to do is you have to define a variable called router and set it equal to create browser router. Then you open and close parentheses like this, and you put another thing inside of here. This is another function from ReactJS called create routes from elements, just like this. And you define it right over here, create routes from elements. And you open and close parentheses again. So this is a way for you to create your routes still using the component tree structure that you're probably familiar with if you've never seen it being created this way. You can also create it using objects, but I would rather you do it this way because I feel like I'm used to doing it this way from the previous versions, so I don't see the point of changing it to something different right now. So what you also need to import is you still have to import the route path, right? The route component in React. However, you don't need to import the routes component that previously existed. Now you're just going to use the route, because what you're going to do is you're going to put a route over here, just like this, and you're going to encompass a lot of stuff with this route. And this route is going to be called the root of your routing system. It's going to have a path of an empty slash because it's the initial page, and the element that you're going to put over here is a component which you're going to call the root component. Now the root component, I'm actually going to create it down here, just like this, const root. And this component is actually not that complicated. Its whole purpose is to structure everything related to your routing that isn't defining routes. So it would be, for example, somewhere to put your navigation, your navbar system, right? So over here at the bottom, we're going to return, and we're going to return some fragments in React. And in here, we're going to put two things. We're going to put first our navbar, if we want to have a navbar in our application, right? And the navbar I'm going to put is going to be simple. It's just going to have a couple links. And for links in ReactJS, you still use the link component. I'm just going to put the links to each page. Actually, I'm just going to put the link for 2 pages because I don't want to overcomplicate this tutorial. And I'm going to put over here home, so a link for the home page and a link for the data page, because the contact page exists just as an example. We don't need to have it being displayed. So we have both links over here. We're going to simply put a to property over here, which is common in links in ReactJS, and we're going to put the link for each of those pages, just like this. So now we have our navbar, but we also want to put an outlet. And if you don't know what an outlet is, basically, you can watch my video on nested routes in ReactJS. It's not that important to understand. It's just important to understand that this is how you're going to display the other pages, the other routes inside of your root component or your root route. So we're just going to put over here a div or wherever you want to put, and we're going to put an outlet. So all of our other routes will be displayed or be replaced by this outlet. So this outlet is just a placeholder for all your other routes. And they will all exist inside of here. So every page in your component, in your project, will be a navbar, and inside of it, it will be the other route that is supposed to be displayed. So now we've made our root component, and it's being perfectly displayed over here. So what do? Now we're going to come over here, and we can start defining our actual pages. So one thing I think a lot of people might be confused with this is, well, we have our home page, right? So why are we actually displaying the root in the empty slash or the initial path of your URL? Well, no, what we did over here is just defined the root, which is a whole different concept from the home page or the initial URL page. To define the initial URL page or the home page in our case, we just put another route inside of this route wrapper that we created above. And this one over here, we just say that it is the index page. So it's the first page, just like this. And we obviously need to put an element, which is going to be the component being displayed. And we're going to import it over here at the top. We're going to say import from ./home.jsx, and we're going to import the home component and just display it just like we would normally over here. Now we're doing the exact same thing with the other components. So we'll do it with the contact and with the data, just like this. I'm also going to import both of them over here and be back in a second. And now I just imported it, as you can see. And now we're basically done with it. We also have to remove the index because I just copy and pasted the routes, but only the home page should have the index prop over here. Now, what we do is, this is basically done. This is how we're defining our routes in the new version. But to set our application to actually display the routes, because as of right now, you can see that basically nothing is being displayed, right? I want to show you guys the actual browser and the changes that we're making being appeared. And I find this online compiler to be better for that use case. So what do we do now? We basically set up all of our routing, but we are actually not seeing any routes, right? I'm in my URL over here. I'm in the home page, but none of the routes are being displayed. So the difference now is that on React Router DOM version 6.4 and above, when you want to make this kind of changes, you actually put over here what is known as a router provider, just like this. It is a self-closing component that you need to import from React Router DOM, just like this. And like any other providers, it will take in over here a prop, which is the router. And you pass in the router that you created, just like this. And you'll see that if I refresh this, it will now actually display correctly all of our routes. You see over here, we're in the home page and it just shows home. If I go to data, it should actually not work because we actually haven't defined the paths for data and contact over here. So to define those paths, we're just gonna say /data for data, and same thing for the contact. We're just gonna put /contact over here. So now let's try. Let's refresh this. If I am on data, as we saw before, it will actually show the data, but if I go to home, I'll be at home, and we can easily switch through the routes. So this is the first main change that you might see from React Router DOM version 6.4. It's just the way you define your routes. But this is not really that important, right? It's just syntax. So what exactly do I mean from what I said in the beginning, that the new changes are very important in relation to data fetching in React? Well, what React Router DOM does now is it allows you to kind of align your navigation system with your data fetching. What I mean by that is, before, if I wanted to have, for example, I created this data component over here, and the whole purpose of it is because over here, it's going to be a component that will be fetching some data and displaying that data in the screen. So what I used to do, or people used to do, right, to fetch this data in its most simple terms, I'm not including using, for example, React Query or use SWR or any other data fetching library out there. I'm just saying, the most simple thing you can do to fetch data in React would be to import a use effect, for example. So I will come over here at the top and import from React a use effect. And then you just define a use effect over here. And inside of this function, you'd probably fetch some data, right? I'm not going to write over here as of right now, but you can picture I would fetch some data and then create a state over here, right? I'll probably create a state to represent that data, something like const equals to use state, and I don't know, call it data and set data. And then I would handle everything from the loading state to the data state and also to the error state, right? So there's usually 3 different states that you might want to take care of when you're fetching data in React. But all of this would obviously take on a lot of code, and you can bypass this by doing stuff like creating hooks to represent, to reuse, right? To fetch data and reuse without having to write all of this inside of each component. But the problem here that React Router DOM is solving is not only the abstraction of your code, it is also the fact that when you fetch the data on a use effect, it will wait for it will obviously, you will navigate to the page, then it will try to render everything, and on the first render, then it would fetch the data, and then replace your state with the data that you receive from the API, which would then trigger a re-render of your component to then display the data that you're fetching. So there's a lot of steps in between displaying your page, displaying the route, and rendering the route, and actually receiving the data. So what React Router DOM does now is it allows, with something called a loader, to actually start fetching the data before, when you start navigating through your URL, meaning that when you actually get to the URL or the route, you will actually have the data already done for you to use. So how exactly would this work? Well, I'm actually gonna use an example sample API over here that is public. If you guys want to use the API as well, just to test it out, you guys can do it as well. So in our case, I chose over here a simple API, which I've used a bunch of times in my videos. It's an API that when you request it, it will actually return a simple JSON with a URL to an image of a dog. So it's just simple, stupid, but also simple to use. And that's why I chose it. So we're gonna grab this URL, and over here inside of our component, instead of fetching the data in between the component definition over here, we're actually going to create a function, and we can call it data loader, something like this. And what this is the function that is going to make the fetching for this component. So here, this function can actually be asynchronous, which is important to understand because it facilitates a lot for our fetching needs. And in this function, what we want to do is we want to fetch the data. I'm going to use the simple fetch API, right? I'm going to grab the response and say fetch. And I'm going to use async await instead of .then and .catch. So if you want to use that syntax, you can use it as well. But I'm going to use async await. I'm going to say fetch and then put over here the link or the URL to the API. Then after we fetch this, we're going to grab the information back, and we're going to get the dog from awaiting the actual response.json. So simple fetching in React, right? And then when we return back, we have to return something in this function, which is the data that we want to have access to in this component. So what we're doing here is we know that this component will need some data from a dog, right? In this case, it will be the URL to an image of a dog. We know that this component, its main purpose is to display this data. So if it's so important for this component to have this data, ReactJS makes it so that it will load the data before you even get to render this component or before you even get to the route of this component. So this data loader will be ingrained inside of the definition of this component, meaning that whatever you return over here, we will have access inside of here after we use a hook that exists in ReactJS that I'll show you guys in a second. But we have to make sure that we return over here the information that we need. And in our case, this dog will be an object because we see over here, it's what we get from the API. It's a JSON, which obviously when turned into JavaScript, it becomes an object. And it has two things. It has the file size bytes, which is just the size of the image, but it also has the URL, which is what we need. So I'm just returning over here the dog.url. Now, how do we grab this data, right? We fetched the data and it seems it looks good, right? But how do we get this? Well, we have to first of all export this, because now when we grab this back, over here in the route definition for this component, right? This is the data component. It actually requires a loader as well, which is a prop inside of here. And what we pass to here is the data loader function that we imported from the data. So over here, we can grab as well the data loader function, right? Because we are exporting it from this component. And we'll grab this, we'll put it over here, and you can see there's no errors, meaning that it accepted our function. Now, what I want to do is I want to access this data, but how exactly will we do that? So to access this, what we do is we come over here at the top, and remember, now we don't need to use a use effect or a use state. It simplifies a lot for us. We actually import something from React Router DOM, which is a hook called useLoaderData. And the useLoaderData is really simple because we know what the data, the loader data is, right? It's whatever we returned over here. So if we want to grab the URL, all I have to say is dog URL equals to useLoaderData. So this hook, all it does is it's going to return whatever you pass in as the loader. And in our case over here, we want to display that image. So I'm going to put over here an image tag with a source, and the source will be the dog URL. And we can test this out to see if it works. It's not an h1 tag, so I'm going to change this actually to a div instead of an h1. And let's go to the data route. You see, maybe it's loading. It's loading a picture of a dog, but you can see it is working. perfectly, but the main point is that the way we approach this is completely different from how we would normally approach before this new change. Now, I understand if you're a beginner, this change might not be so significant as I actually am saying it is, but for your reference, with this new changes, it means basically that if we have a large application, which includes a lot of routes and complicated nesting of routes, and we have data that should be accessible for multiple different parts of that routing system, and we have data that should be accessible through multiple parts of that routing system, we now have all of the data being able to be loaded in parallel, which is extremely good for those specific use cases. But one thing you might question still is, I mentioned in the beginning that we don't need to create the state for loading, for error, for any of that anymore, and it's all simplified into this piece of code over here. But I'm actually not showing loading being displayed, right? Any display of the data being loaded. Actually, when you refresh the page or you try to load the data, it might even take a while and it doesn't show any UI feedback that the data is loading. In my case over here, I'm actually with really bad Wi-Fi. This is why I'm using an online setup, an online compiler over here, because I don't have my normal computer with me. That's why I have to use the browser to do this tutorial. But we still want to be able to see some sort of feedback over here, right? And the way we do this is by using another hook in ReactJS, which is a really cool hook called useNavigation. With this hook, we can actually get a lot of information about the navigation in our app. So if I say useNavigation over here, this variable will give us a lot of cool information. For example, if the state of the navigation is loading. So how would I do something like that, right? Well, I want to display some sort of UI that is different if the data, if we're still navigating. Now, the reason why this is important with this change is because now we're loading the data and then navigating, right? Before, it wouldn't make sense to put a loading screen for while you're navigating, because navigation would be almost instantly. But now, since we're fetching data beforehand, we have to do something like this, or else our users might wait forever with an empty UI because your data failed to load or something like that, right? So what I can ask is something like if navigation.state is equal to loading, then I want to display some sort of UI over here. The UI I'm going to display or return is just a simple h1 tag saying that the data is loading, right? But you can put a spinner, you can put whatever you want over here. But you'll see that now, if I refresh the data, right, if I refresh the page and I request a new image, it will say loading for that split second that the image is obviously, or the API request is being processed, and then display the data. And this is how you would do it through this. Now, to finalize this tutorial, I wanted to give my opinions on whether or not this will replace something like a data fetching library or any other type of alternative to using this kind of syntax. I would say no, it wouldn't. I will still use React query, which is obviously what I usually love using. I've talked about it in the past a lot of times. I do enjoy the syntax. This reminds me a lot of, for example, Next.js, and I will indeed use something like this because I like the idea that React Router is proposing in this new update. So the reason also I wanted to make this video is because I didn't make an update to that video, and it's been 3 months, and a lot of people don't actually know about the new changes in React Router. So for that reason, I wanted to make this video. Before we end the video, I wanted to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I also wanted to wish all of you guys happy holidays, depending if you guys celebrate Christmas or not. It doesn't matter. I wanted to wish you guys a happy end of the year as well. I really appreciate all the support you guys gave me this year. I wish I could have ended my last video of the year with a better setup than what I have over here, but it's fine. I'm not in my house. I'm not at home anymore. I'm visiting my family, and for that reason, I had to make some adjustments. But yeah, I really wanted to thank you guys. Really hope you guys have a good year next year, and yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.